Okay, our next interview is with Russell Freedman of Second Life Books. And Russell, can you just give us a small thumbnail biography of yourself? Education, family, apprenticeships, how you got started in the book business. Just take us on a little ride.
Well, I was born in 1947, and I went to Boston University, got a degree in theater and English and history. And my father was, at the time, and still is, a longtime book collector who put together major collections of Mark Twain and George Bernard Shaw and a number of other American and English authors. And he used to drag me around when I was a kid to bookstores. And I found myself as a student with 3 shelves of books in my room that had nothing to do with my classes. And when I got out of college, I was spending time working in the theater, spent some time picking apples, and when I had decided I needed a real job, I decided to become a bookseller. So
it's because of your family background.
Family background, and my father was able to help me by giving me some books that were not his, his specialty or areas that he was going to advance with. And unfortunately, I never did an apprenticeship. I've often thought it would have been a good idea, especially as I got into much more complicated books. So we opened up a bookstore in Williamstown, Massachusetts in 1972. It was a general open shop, but I did have one wall of sort of first editions and better books. And when I put out my first catalog, I realized it was like having 300 or 400 books, real book buyers, book collectors walk into the store simultaneously. So, and it actually has a wonderful story. My first order was Howard Mott. And
His name comes up a lot, doesn't it?
He bought 2 books from my first catalog, and as Howard always did, sent the check out to pay for them the day he got the books with a little note saying it was his great pleasure to be my first customer for my first catalog. And I've often had a warm spot in my heart for Howard, as for other reasons as well. Yeah. And at that point, we decided we didn't need to hassle with the open shop, and we moved our business to our home.
How long? What was your period of
About
transition?
a year and a half. We were in the open shop, and we thought Williamstown, being a college town, would have a lot of book buyers. Didn't really. It didn't have much in the way of graduate students, so I think they're much more serious buyers than faculty members and whatever. So we had a barn behind our house where we put books in there and started doing annual or biannual catalogs. And eventually, when we ended up moving from there, we didn't get a variance to have an open shop in our new place, so we pretty much closed down the book barn idea and pretty much now just deal in catalogs and book fairs. And
what's your presence on the internet, Russell?
I've got pretty much my entire stock on the internet, about 15,000 books, a little more.
Do you find that, just sort of mentally break down, if you will, the percentage of business you do through catalogs, through internet, and through people coming to visit you?
Well, people coming to visit me, maybe 5% or less. Mm-hmm. If I think in terms of numbers of books sold, probably 90% of them are on the internet.
Right.
I think in terms of dollar value, catalogs and book fairs are probably 60 to 70% of the total sales, being that most of the books that get sold online are one-time sales to people, $20 and $30 books and that kind of thing. And the more expensive books go to institutions, either through quoting or catalogs or whatever.
How do you respond to the statement, there are no young booksellers, there are no young collectors?
Well, actually, I was thinking about that. I was talking to Jeff Towns, who said that he was at the London Book Fair, and all the dealers seemed to be in their mid to late 60s, and the collectors are all in their mid to late 70s. Yet today and yesterday, there are a lot of young people in their 30s and 40s and younger, college-age kids who are coming through. I don't know, people who buy rare books tend to have some kind of financial security, so that you're not going to find that with young kids. But I was actually quite interested in the fact that there were a lot of younger people in the...
And they seem to be, what, knowledgeable or just...
Hard to say. A lot of looking. A lot of looking, but there's a lot of people are doing a lot of looking.
70-year-olds are looking too.
Exactly. There's a lot of looking going on.
When the internet exploded, how easy or difficult was it for you to transition your business from what it was before the internet to now, where there is an internet? Did you have problems?
No, it was very easy for me because when we moved from our original place in Adams to Lanesborough, we doubled or tripled our overhead. And my brother's my accountant, and he basically said the only way you're going to increase your productivity is getting computer. This is before online, but just getting computer. We were early users of bookies, and you know this. You know the stories about bookies.
Sure.
But it meant that once we transitioned out of bookies and we're now using Bookhound, which you are as well, we were right there to be able to just upload, and it was seamless.
I mean, I've found that the people who do this Bookhound are extremely easy to work with and always available, pretty much always available for questions.
Yeah, and they're great to work with. I've had all three of them are terrific.
Great support.
Yeah, it's great support, which is terrific. You know, I pay for it, and they've also designed my web page, so I have it through the web page and through Bookhound. They're always at the end of the phone or email message or whatever. So it meant that when it came time to upload, and at that point I think we might have had 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 books in stock on bookies, and so once we transferred over to Bookhound and uploaded, now we have, as I say, about 15,000.
About 15,000.
But what it forced me to do is, for the first time, I had to hire somebody to work. The first night, I uploaded my 6,000 or 5,000 books on the internet. It was on a Friday, and Saturday or Sunday morning, 3 a.m., my fax machine went off. And I came down the next morning, because this was 5,000 new books that had never been online, and I must have had 20 orders the first 24 hours. I went, oh my God, I can't cope with this. I'm not going to be able to find these books and pack them up. Panic attack. Oh God, it's working. So I have somebody now works for me 3 days a week, and in the winter 4 days a week, doing cataloging of the inexpensive books basically, and a lot of all the packing and that kind of stuff. So it's worked out.
Those are all necessary adjuncts.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
You mentioned Howard Mott previously. Can you think of any other booksellers when you first started out who were mentors or helped grease the wheels and made it a little bit easier for you to be a bookseller?
Well, Howard specifically, just because he made me feel welcome. I mean, there weren't times when I called him up and said, Howard, I have a problem. Can you deal with this? But he'd always, at every book fair, he would always come over and just chat. And for a young bookseller, being taken seriously by someone who'd been in business since, 1934 or 36 or whatever.
Like
it made me feel welcome and part of the trade. Sam Murray was somebody who I used to see all the time, and he would make sure I got involved in bibliography and that kind of thing. I more had, in terms of mentoring, some librarians that I met, especially Bob Volz up at Chapin Library at Williams. And it's a wonderful library, and he would love it when I came over with a problem. And he taught me probably more than any bookseller did about understanding especially old books, which really helped my transition from when I first was involved. I was doing a lot of modern firsts, now I do very little. Yeah. He sort of helped me conceptualize how to deal with older books.
I see for one of your specialties is women,
right?
Women's authors, and is that something that a field that's fairly new? I mean, in the last 15 to 20 years, I don't remember when I started in the trade, nobody cared about books about women. They just cared
one of the things that's always attracted me are books that I've never seen before, and books that I don't know anything about. And I realized it was a huge hole in my education. I knew nothing about it. I'd never heard of Susan B. Or maybe I'd heard of Susan B. Anthony.
But some of the others.
The Grimke's, there's Wollstonecraft, Mary Hayes, this whole group of English and American, not to mention the French and whatever. And it was just an area I was very much interested in reform movements. So I also deal with abolition and temperance and the anti-slave movement and a whole range of these things. And so the women's movement was critical, it seemed to me, and intersected with these things. And there was nobody else at that point doing it.
No.
And so I evolved there because I kept, every time I'd find a book and I'd look up somebody, I'd think, wow, this woman was amazing. And yet I'd never heard of her. And so that's sort of what pushed me on. And then, you develop relationships with customers and institution, so it sort of keeps you going. And while a number of other people have sort of come and gone, I'm still
they
doing
call
it.
it women's studies now.
Yeah, women's studies.
And I suppose it's as good a moniker as anything.
I guess so, but the most important women historians are just consider themselves historians.
Historians first, women second.
Yeah.
Is there any problem or difficulty of being in a small town with two major booksellers?
No.
I mean, you and Robert are both Lanesborough people. You're
Right.
ABAA members. You live about a mile apart.
Right.
You get along?
Yeah, we get along fine. Somebody comes to see me and asks, is Robert here? I'll call him, or vice versa.
Yes,
Actually, there used to be an antique store that had a whole room of books. We used to joke that per capita we had more booksellers than any place else maybe in the world, because Lanesborough has 3,000 people in it.
And two major booksellers.
And two booksellers. No, not really, because as you know, I mean, how many books are we going to buy locally anyway?
Yeah.
We have slightly different interests and major different interests, although everybody overlaps. So no, I don't think it's an issue at all.
Russell, as you sit here, put on your thinking cap for a moment and think about, what do you see as the major challenges for us as booksellers in the next 10 or 15 years of our careers?
Obviously the shrinking market of people who read,
Yeah.
and the shrinking market of people who collect. But I think obviously the internet.
Yeah.
The internet, as I keep saying to people, the internet gives and it takes. You find a wonderful book and you look online and there's 5 copies of it. Years ago, what I had wasn't known by Quaritch, and what Quaritch had wasn't known by me. And my customers would look at things and they'd say, oh, this is a great copy. Now, I send out a catalog to somebody and they can punch in a few things and, oh, there's 5 copies. I didn't know I needed that book, but I can find another one that's cheaper or whatever. I think it's also the internet has really shrunk and the prices of mediocre, meaning medium and inexpensive books. It's made rare things even rarer, and I think the business is doing this. In the sense that it's both expanding on one end and contracting on the other end. It's disheartening when you go to an auction. I was at an auction, there was a signed Whitman of Specimen Days, signed with a signed photograph. And I was thinking of bidding on it, and I look online. There are 5 copies online at $6,000 to $8,000 a piece.
Amazing, huh?
When you think, gee, when Whitman signed this thing, he smudged the signature a little bit. So is this now an unsaleable signed by Whitman book? Because do I really want this to be copy 7 or copy 6? I think that's, in a sense, the internet has given us incredible amounts of information. In the sense, it's also made it more difficult to find your niche. It's also, if I can just interject, it's killed a lot of open shops.
Well, yeah, I
That's
think
another thing.
That's one of the huge problems.
Yeah, we used to have dealers coming through. A lot of open shops, sort of killed themselves. I mean, you can't blame them, but if you price things as they're listed online, the dealers aren't going to come and buy them because there's no room. And so, consequently, the dealers aren't coming through, and a lot of places closed up. So that's
And
really
it's not just in New England.
No,
it's all over the country.
That's right. That's right.
For example, 4 years ago, I was in Charlotte. They had 5 booksellers in Charlotte. I was there last year. They have 0.
They have 0. Yeah.
And open shops are closing everywhere.
That's right.
Do you think that this trend could ever be reversed?
I don't think so. I don't think there's any putting the toothpaste back in the tube.
So your
the internet is, I think, is just going to get here, is going to be here and stay here, obviously, and I think we all have to somehow deal with it. I mean, we have to deal with it at the book fair.
Of course.
If you have internet access and people can see a book and then go online and see if there are, copies being available and whatever.
One of the problems that a lot of us face is the knowledge issue.
Mm-hmm.
There are booksellers who claim that just by feeling and looking at books, they can have this extra sense that this is a good book and this isn't a good book. I think to some extent that's true.
Well, I think it is, because you see some things and you say, Like I bought a book yesterday, and it was a book from 1715. I'd never seen it, 1750. I'd never seen it before. I'm dealing in women's books for 25 years.
Right.
And then I can look it up online and say, well, OCLC says there are 3 copies in the U.S. But just, you can honestly say, not common in the trade. Whereas the other thing about the internet is that it's very easy for people who don't have that knowledge base to think they do and to go and, Kevin McDonald tells stories about people just taking his whole description of a book, adding it to their book. And the book may not be the same book.
No, or the same condition.
Or the same condition, and they don't know what BAL is, and they don't know what house is, or any of the, what for us has become over years standard language. They're used to cutting and pasting, and that gets you into trouble. But unfortunately, a lot of the mass book collectors out there don't know the difference between one or the other. It's one of the good things about ABAA. Generally, those 4 letters means that you have a level of sophistication, integrity, or whatever that isn't necessarily going to be other places.
Yeah. Russell, you've been in the trade for what, X number of years?
32 years, 35 years.
Just see if you can, we asked the same question to Bob Rubin, and he sort of laughed, but he came up with a good answer. Think a minute, what was your best buy and what was your worst buy?
My best buy. Well, I can tell you my worst buy. My
worst
buy was I bought a couple of Dickens firsts and about 4 or 5 other books from a woman up in Maine and actually in Vermont, and she was so concerned that I give her enough money for them, and she was determined to get X, Y, and Z, and at a certain point I should have just pulled out and said, this isn't going to happen. And I ended up buying them, and it's like 6 years I have all of them. I haven't.
New friends have become old friends.
New friends have become old friends, and as John Vanny Cohen used to say, well, Russell, you have to have inventory.
Yeah,
so these are inventory.
That's what Nebenzahl used to tell me.
Yeah.
I used to say to him, well, all these books you can't sell. He says, no, they're my inventory.
They're your inventory, exactly.
Well, I still think they were unsaleable, frankly.
Yeah. Best buy is hard to say. There's been a lot of things over the years that, that have been good buys. I mean, one of my favorite books as I had last year, it was just last year, is a 4th folio, which I bought in the trade, and the person I bought it from thought that the first signature was facsimile because it was so clean and crisp. He said it must be facsimile, and I bought it on that basis, and I did some research on it, compared it to the copy at Williams, took it to the Folger, and the universally said that is not a facsimile, and I got in touch with the dealer, and he said, no, it's a facsimile, it's a facsimile. Well, I ended up selling it last year at this book fair, and it was one of those books, I guess we all have that as booksellers, and you must in Americana. There's certain books you just want to handle. You just want to, even if you can't keep it, you just want to know that in 35 years, you had it for a while. And I used to have that, I had that folio for 6 or 8 months on my shelf, and I used to just love having it there. And we were very involved in the local Shakespeare Festival, and for their opening night, they were doing Hamlet. So I brought the 4th folio down and we put it in a locked case in front of the opening of Hamlet. And it was just a treat to have it there. And then, of course, it was a treat to sell it. And it was a beautiful copy. And so that was sort of one of my favorite sales. And, there's just lots of deals that sort of come and go. That's the one that sticks in my mind.
We were just talking a moment ago about young booksellers, young collectors. There are good young booksellers.
Mm-hmm.
And who do you see as some of the rising stars in our trade, some of the younger booksellers who are going to be big time?
I really don't know. I have a hard time answering that. There's a lot of people. I don't deal that. Being a specialist in women's studies, I buy more from other dealers than sell to other dealers. Most of my sales are to private people or institutions, so I haven't had the kind of constant interaction with younger dealers.
What percentage, You said you do most of your businesses with collectors and librarians. Break it down, if you can, percentage-wise. What percentage you're doing volume-wise with libraries versus volume-wise with privates?
Well, probably 25%. If I include volume, well, dollar volume or
Either
book
way,
volume.
either way.
You know, again, dollar volume, probably 75% to institutions.
So the institutions are still a viable entity in your career.
Especially for the antiquarian books.
Yeah.
And there's also private people as well. But not that much to the trade, some to the trade. When I sort of transitioned out of Modern First, I think a lot of the young dealers are going into Modern First. That's maybe another reason. And I don't do much with Modern First anymore. I sort of
that was the beginnings of your business, though, wasn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, we used to do 20th century literature, and I just found it was the same books over and over. And I was at, and I won't name names, but I was at a book fair at the Copley Plaza, and
you're dating yourself.
I'm dating myself, and I was sharing a booth for someone because I had forgotten to send my check. We were moving. I'd forgotten to send my check in, and all of a sudden I realized I was past the date. There were no more full booths. I got a half booth. And there was somebody had a Sun Also Rises and dust jacket, and it was in my booth. And 4 dealers stood around, and they discussed the blush of the yellow on the dust jacket. And I just, I listened to this for a while, and then I realized, this is for me. This may be for other people with a different sensibility. I mean, I can, I know when the dust jacket's torn or ragged or whatever, but I just couldn't relate to it. I said, this is it. So I ended up transitioning basically to antiquarian stuff.
Do you see any particular subject area in the field of books that is neglected that might be someplace for a niche for someone? I mean, years and years ago, people never dealt in right fiction, for example.
Right.
And then there was a vogue in right fiction, and now you can't give it away. And do you see anything on the horizon for a young bookseller who might want to specialize in something that other people aren't specializing in?
I think specialization is, Howard Mott again used to say the specialist dealer has the right and has earned the right of starving quietly. I think people have to, that's not a direct quote, but essentially.
It's the essence.
It's the essence. I know there are people who are doing gay studies things now, and people are doing a lot of photography and art books. There's pretty much everything. I had somebody come in who's, every year comes in once wireless in communication, somebody else looking for dance and, performing arts, but that's being done. If there's anything we've learned is that people collect everything.
Right.
And when people ask me what to collect or what to sell, I give them basically the same answer, which is what you're interested in.
What is your interest?
And that, I used to do a lot of agriculture and horticulture and gardening. That seems to have, waned the way it was when I first started doing it.
And the last question, which might be the most difficult to think about, is do you think that our business is going to continue, or do you see it at some point not being a viable entity any longer?
No, I think it's going to continue. People talk a lot about, computerized books and whatever. You look at digitalizing and all that.
It is.
Look at Harry Potter. It captured people's imagination, and there were these, 7-year-old girls with 500-page books clutched, reading it for the 3rd time. There's something about the reading process, and you show people in the trade or out of the trade, especially out of the trade, you show someone a book from the 17th century or the 16th century, and it's almost like they're trembling just touching it. There's a magic to the physicality of a book, and I don't see it disappearing. Less and less people are reading, to be sure, but people are still hunting for places to put their money, and it's wealthy people who essentially are book collectors, but there's also a lot of students that are book collectors and have interests, and it's definitely transitioning. There's no question about that, but I don't think it's going to disappear.
So
hopefully not until after I retire.
So that was my next question, Russell. Are you going to see it out to the end, or at some point you're going to say the heck with it?
I don't think. To a certain point, my father's 92. He stopped collecting books when he was 90. I'm 60, so that gives me 30 more years to keep up with him. The nice thing about it is that you can continue to do it on a limited basis. You know, I'm not sure I'll always have 15,000 books online. My assistant is in her mid to late 70s. You know, at a certain point, she's probably going to call it a day. And I could see transitioning to a smaller, you know. Originally, the idea was let's have one wall of books and leave it at that, you know. That's appealing when I think of all the books I have to schlep home after this book fair.
Yeah, you're right. Russell, thanks very much.
Okay, Michael.